Live, and live. So good to see you guys. I'm here as always to give you the live stream questions on investment, answering your questions, commenting on the current state of the housing market, what's going on in the housing market at the moment, what's going on in the property market, and what are the news headlines looking like. Thanks for joining, guys. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask me on property investment, start typing away and I'll try and answer them. But what I'm going to start with is I want to talk about international protection and the cost of accommodating refugees and asylum seekers. And this, I'm not talking about it from a sort of an anti point of view or a pro point of view. I'm really looking at it just from the cost of it, because you have to kind of question whether or not you're getting value. Now, I read on, if you go into IPASS, which is the International Protection Accommodation Services, that is it is a website that you can go into, and when you go into the website, it tells you all of the data and statistics and stuff like that. And what you've seen is a dramatic increase in the last number of years on the amount of people that we're accommodating. And this is understandable given the fact that there's quite a few wars going on, and what people are looking for are ways to escape from harm and difficulty and things like that. So it's understandable that people are looking to kind of get out of their countries, and really, where do they go? And so a lot of them arrive on Irish shores these days. Now, it used to be that you would go to the UK because it's a bigger country and it could accommodate more people and stuff. But now, because of Brexit and stuff like that, I guess that's part of it. But what I found is that there is, I was just looking at the numbers, and in the week, just last week alone, 445 people arrived at Dublin Airport claiming asylum. And so that is a huge number. If you think about the fact that we're in a housing crisis at the moment, and we're trying to accommodate people, Irish people, first of all, but we're also trying to accommodate all of the new people that are arriving into the country. But then on top of that, 445 people arrived at Dublin Airport last week alone and asked for assistance, that they're looking for asylum. They need international protection, as it's called, and they're escaping persecution or whatever it might be. And when you look at the numbers, there's it's a couple of it's up now at something like 30,000 or something like that in a year. It's quite substantial numbers. And I was looking at the numbers, huge number of people coming from Nigeria, lots of people coming from the Congo and various places like that in African nations. I know a lot of people automatically assume that it's Ukraine and things like that, but that's not the case. There's huge populations in sub-Saharan Africa. Like if you go down to Nigeria, the population of Nigeria is 226 million. And there is, a lot of political instability there. You might have heard of Boko Haram, which is this, I suppose it's like a terrorist group essentially, and they've kidnapped people and stuff like that. So something like 6,000 people from Nigeria came to Ireland last year seeking accommodation. So it's not all one group, as is often the case. But my point isn't to pass judgment on any of that. It's really just the cost. And there was an article on Sunday, I think it was, and it was around the amount of money that's being spent on this stuff. And there was a report. They were saying that the company accommodating international protection applicants at City West Hotel in Dublin was paid more than 20 million euro by the state in the 3 months to the end of June. So 20 million for 3 months, that is a huge sum of money. And that would suggest that it's about 80 million a year being spent just in that one location alone. And so a lot to be sort of considered in that regard. I mean, when you consider how much it would, you could spend that kind of money on building housing and stuff like that, you'd wonder, would you not be better off spending that kind of money on fixed facilities rather than on something that's temporary like that. The next thing that they were talking about, let me see, the latest list of payments exceeding 20,000 made in the second quarter of this year by the Department of Integration shows a wide range of companies being paid hundreds of millions of euro for accommodation to the department. Mosney Holidays PLC, which do not publish financial accounts, were paid 14 million during the period for housing international protection applicants at their holiday resort in County Meath. Guest Ford Limited, which is the owner of the Red Cow Mourne Hotel, was paid 8.5 million for the provision of IP applicants accommodation, and that for the 3 months, and it was paid 9.5 million the previous quarter. So 8.5 million in one quarter, 9.5 million the previous quarter. IGO Emergency Management, owner of IGO Cafe Limited of Sallynoggin Road, Dunleary, was paid 13 million for the second quarter of 2024, having received 5 million for the first 3 months of the year. Owned by Anne Murphy of County Tipperary and Christina Andrews of Sallynoggin, the IGO Cafe made a profit of 800,000 in 2023. So it's incredible the amount of money that's being paid for this kind of protection, or this kind of accommodation, I should say. And so anyway, I thought I would start with that because it just stuck out like a sore thumb when I read that figure. And just the article lists all of the different entities that are making all this money. Like Oakgate Limited, Carrickmacross was paid 2 million in the second quarter. A company called Tifco Hotel Group, which includes Travelodge Holiday Inns, they've been paid more than 50 million since the start of the year. It's just it's incredible. So anyway, how are you guys? Oh, do you know what? I haven't got the bloody mic. No wonder it's way over here. Maybe that's a bit better, Kevin. Thank you for pointing it out. Let me see, what are we going to get into? There's various other articles, but I thought I'd open it up with, if you guys have any questions. I'm going to start with, I saw today that the inflation rate here in the country has fallen again. So it's dropped now to a 3-year low of just 0.2%, driven by falling energy prices. And so that is good news for everybody, because we've all been feeling the pinch in the last couple of years, for sure. And the only, I suppose, the not so good news about that is that you've got inflation is not controlled. Like we have inflation in our country, but we don't have control over our interest rates that we set here in the country. Our central bank doesn't set our rates. They're set by the European Central Bank. And so, whereas it's good news that we are getting inflation down, it'll be guided by the amount of inflation that's been paid across the European zone, the Eurozone, I guess, rather than just Ireland. But it is good news. At least it's going in the right direction. The other thing that I've been looking at, I gave a talk last week at a thing called the FIABC. And FIABC is it's an organization that does, I think it's professional real estate people and stuff like that. But I gave a talk that I'm going to kind of draw upon today, just to kind of go over some of the different, just some topics that are interesting while I'm waiting, if you guys have got questions. The other thing that I'm going to mention is that I have a free school community. And the school community, if you go, depending where you're looking in from, there are, you might see free school community in my bio or something like that. If you click on that and join, you can ask questions in there, and I'll always go there for the first questions, because it's a way of just making sure that I'm rewarding the people that are actively in the community and stuff. So one of the questions was from a chap called Dylan, and he was asking, that they're saving for saving for a mortgage for his first investment property, but a good friend of his rang up and offered to come in on 50% of the mortgage. And so he was wondering if it's a good idea to go into business together with a friend. And he's just asking my thoughts and advice on that kind of stuff. And I think there's a couple of aspects of it that I think is worth thinking about. If you're getting into business with a friend, it can be a nice way to start your journey in the property market, because you have, instead of second guessing yourself the whole time, which is often a problem, that you're kind of, if you're not sure what you're doing, if you have no, say, property education, like the stuff that I teach in my courses and stuff, is there's a couple of different ones, but there's like a starter course for beginners. And I would certainly suggest that people would start with some, like whether it's mine or somebody else's, like start with a basic starter course, because if you don't have a starter course, like there's an awful lot of stuff that you can get wrong, that you might have overlooked, that you might even be aware is a thing. So I do think it's recommended that you start with some sort of a basic course. And then as you go up, like I do more advanced stuff for people who are looking to raise money from investors and things like that. But when you're getting into the early stages and maybe you don't have all of the money saved up yourself, partnering with somebody is a great way to do it, because if you partner with somebody, it means that, first of all, you're sharing the load, and that's not just financial load, but also psychological load, because a lot of the time, just getting into buying something, there's a significant cost of buying a property. You've got to sign up to a mortgage, you got to do all this kind of stuff. It can be a bit daunting if you're not familiar. So it can feel reassuring to have somebody who's there and you can kind of ask them questions and say, what do you think? Should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? And it just means that you're not carrying the burden all to yourself. And so maybe it's a little bit easier to sleep at night. But having said that, there are aspects that you need to be careful of. And that is because there can be all sorts of friction in a business relationship, even if on a personal level you don't have any issues. Like getting into business with a pal is a nice thing insofar as you know your pal, you know the personality, they're your pal, so obviously you have a bit of fun and banter with them and things like that, which is all great. But one of the issues that you're going to have is that sometimes people, when the chips are down, if there's any kind of an aspect of difficulty that person is going through personally, or maybe you and your partner, maybe you've made a mistake and you've bought something and you've overpaid for it, or you bought something that now has some sort of an issue emerged that you weren't aware of at the beginning. If that happens, it can draw out friction and it can create tension between the two parties. And it might be through no fault of yours, and it might not necessarily be your friend's fault, but it might just suddenly be that the two of you are now under pressure and you disagree on the solution for fixing the problem. And that's where friction can be introduced. And what I've seen is, people start out great pals and everything's going great. And the moment there's an issue and somebody, has to, first of all, somebody has to deal with the issue. And I've seen situations where you might have 2 or 3 partners, and those partners might not all have the time to put into it. So, often one of the partners ends up carrying the load and is the one who's like sending the messages, dealing with maybe, banks and solicitors and all this kind of stuff. And that can be a burden, because I can remember when I was in various partnerships and I was the one who did all of the admin and stuff, and I got paid for it, and so that was fine. But if there's no arrangement in place around about who's going to do all the work and who's going to be paid for that, and unless you guys are in agreement, look, you're doing the work, it's only fair that you get paid, that's fine. But sometimes people are like, sure, come on, it's a couple of emails, like what do you mean, like you want to get paid? But if you don't do it and your partner doesn't do it, who's going to do it? Somebody has to do it. So you could end up paying a third party to come in and do that kind of thing for you. So first of all, you got to have the conversation about what is involved. Like if there's email traffic coming in, whose inbox is it going to? Yours or mine? If there is agreements that are going to be, you know, if we're coordinating with, say, a solicitor or banks or anything, are they writing to the two of us? Are they writing to one of us? Are they, you know, who are they expecting an answer from? If they're picking up the phone, are they calling both of us into a meeting, or am I going to be the kind of the point man on this whole thing? That's important to know as well. The other thing is that it's always worth thinking that what if something bad happens? What if you have a major falling out? And you might think that that's unlikely because you've known one another for years and you've never had a crossword between you. But in the event that something kind of goes badly wrong in the investment or in the business or something like that, it can suddenly introduce a dynamic that you're not familiar with, and you're kind of suddenly you're thinking, who the hell does that guy think he is, like saying that? Or who, you know, suddenly you can kind of be at odds with one another. And when that happens, it might get to the point where somebody says, you know what, I want out. I don't want to be involved in this anymore. I just want my money. Give me my money. And so that means now that the property has to be put on the market and has to be sold. What's an acceptable price? Are you just going to put it on the market and sell it? Or do you personally want to hold on to it? And so you want to buy out your partner? Or does your partner want to buy you out? Like, all of this can kind of be introduced at a later date when it's never really being considered an issue. And if that happens, it creates all sorts of distrust and stuff, because suddenly it's like, well, if I'm buying him, then I want to get the best possible price, and he's going to want to get the highest price. So suddenly there's this real range in prices between what you're willing to pay and what he's willing to part with. And so you can end up in a situation that can be quite difficult. And it's best, if you can, to start at the very, very beginning, start with that and just have a very clear understanding on, look, we're great mates, we're always going to be mates, but let's just assume if something were to go wrong, what would be the deal? Like, who gets to sell? What's the price? Who gets to offer? And so you might just say to yourselves, look, in the event that I want out, then you can buy me out. And if you're willing to pay me the price that I want, then the deal is yours. But if you're not willing to, then I have to be able to kind of put my share on the market or something like that. Now, how realistic is it that you can sell 50% share of your property to somebody else? It's not really viable. So this is where it becomes difficult. Are you going to force somebody else to buy the property? Or are you going to just put it on the market? I see somebody thinking, what a load of malarkey. Yeah, it is. But this is the problem, is people go into partnership with friends and they don't think about this stuff. And then at a later date, they suddenly have to deal with it. And I've had worse situations. I've had situations where somebody has died and suddenly you're not dealing with your friend that you've had for years any longer. You're dealing with a solicitor that's representing the estate of your friend. And you might have been the best friend of this pal, but your pal is now dead and the solicitor has no relationship with you at all. And so what can you do? Like, a solicitor is not, you can't kind of say, come on, be reasonable. Like, a solicitor has got a certain way of doing things. And so it is, I think it's important to make sure that you go and put some sort of a formal structure on it if you can. It doesn't have to be complicated, but just in the event that we diverge in terms of our alignment on what we're buying or what we're selling or what we're doing with the property, then we can terminate the partnership. And if we terminate the partnership, these are the steps that we'll take. And that way everyone's clear. Yep, that's good for me. It's good for you. And we all agree it while we're in good terms. And then, nobody can sort of argue that you're trying to skew the deal in your favor or something like that. Another thing just to think about, if you do go into property deal with a friend or with anyone in a kind of a partnership type arrangement, it's important to remember that there's a thing called an enduring power of attorney. And if you were to get into, we'll say, a joint loan with somebody, and you have 50% and they have 50%, and you're paying this loan, and then let's say some terrible accident happens and your friend falls off a bike or something like that and is unconscious. Whilst they remain unconscious, you cannot do anything with that property. You both have to be co-signing signatures and stuff like that. And unless your friend or your partner, unless they have got what's known as an enduring power of attorney that grants permission to one of their family members to sign documents on their behalf in the event that they were incapacitated, that's the only time that you can actually sell the property or something like that, whilst your friend is, we'll say, on a hospital bed, unconscious, and they haven't woken up yet. And the doctor's saying it could be tomorrow, it could be a month, it could be 6 months. And you're like, geez, there's a deal to sell this place right now. We should be doing it now. Can't do anything about it unless that power of attorney exists. So worth knowing. Now, I saw a question there. I'll jump into that question. It's from Ella. Do you think things will decline from now? Would it be wise to buy an investment property as a FTB? What's that FTB? You might clarify. But I don't know if things will decline. I can kind of see things actually increasing. If you mean decline as in prices decline, I don't actually think that's likely, because what's happening now is the European Central Bank is starting to reduce rates. And so it will become cheaper to borrow money. And so usually what that does is that drives property prices up. So I would suggest that probably prices will continue to rise, because when borrowing costs go down, then more people can afford to buy that property. First-time buyer. Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about some sort of a thing. Yeah, as a first-time buyer, well, an investment, you wouldn't. Are you talking about buying an investment property or buying a home? Because a first-time buyer, you're only going to get a grant for a property that's for yourself. You can't get the first-time buyer's allowance or any of that stuff for an investment. That is to collect rent or something. It has to be for yourself. And so, but I think that I would imagine that prices will continue there's going to be pressure on it. I was looking at this, as I was saying earlier, I did this talk last week, and my talk was about the housing crisis, and it was all about what are the obstacles to fixing the housing crisis, and what is causing what is making it so difficult to build properties. We need to build lots and lots of properties. And I'll open up my talk now, and I'll just share some of the slides that I went through. But what's really interesting about this was we were talking about where we need to be compared to where we are. And there was a couple of slides that I shared, and it's around new home completions in Ireland. This will just give you an idea. So in 2023, we built 32,626 units. And this is from the Central Statistics Office. Then there is a forecast from Davy that in the year 2024, we're likely to complete 36,000. So increase of about 4,000 over last year. Now, then they're estimating that there'll be a big pickup in demand, in supply, and that we'll go from 36,000 to 42,000 units built in 2025. Now, just to give you an idea, back in 2007, we were doing 85,000 units. So we are the best year that we've had in 17 years is going to be 50% of where we were in 2007. That gives you an idea of how far away we are from where it used to be. Now, in the case of the EU average number of properties that are being delivered per head of capita, we'll say, is 85,000. That's where we need to be at 50% of the EU average. 85,000. So we need to go back to the 2007 max that we hit to actually just achieve half of the EU average. And it was saying the estimates are that if we wanted to build, if the same amount as the EU average, we would have to build 122,000 a year, and we'd have to just consistently be doing that year in, year out. So you can see we're nowhere, like we are currently a quarter of the EU average. And so it's just, we're so far away. And, you know, the nation is gripped by this acute housing crisis. So why would there be a decline in prices? I can't see it. The only thing that could happen, and this is the bit that, like, if you just talk about the pure economic rationale behind it, it doesn't make sense. There's very limited supply and there's huge demand. So there's an imbalance there that's way, way over. And when there's a massive, massive imbalance like that, it pushes prices up. But what happens sometimes, and this is one of the reasons, it's an election year, and you have what's likely to be a giveaway budget coming up now. And they're talking about it being a giveaway budget. The reason it's going to be a giveaway budget is because as soon as they give all this money to the electorate, they'll turn around and they'll say, right, now we're having an election, so please, you know, pay us back your thanks by voting us back into power. And that could well be what happens. The current government get back into power. If that's the case, then continue to go on as they are. But if Sinn Féin were to come in and replace the current government, then there's a big question mark on whether there would be new policies introduced and various things done to the market in an attempt to, we'll say, reduce prices, bring down rents, things like that. But one of the biggest problems with this kind of intervention that happens, and it doesn't matter why it happens, it happens. You, like, a lot of people might think that this is all intentional and that there's this like group of elite people that are kind of like rubbing their hands saying, oh yes, we're going to make all this money. But what happens is people introduce policy, and they introduce it because they want to affect some sort of a positive change, but they don't realize the knock-on impact it's going to have. And so what you'll have is, if you use, for example, in 2008, the Green Party, John Gormley, decided that bedsits were this awful substandard way of living, and that it was completely wrong that somebody should be expected to live in a room, a single room, with a bed and a kitchen sink and a cooker and a sitting room and a TV all in the one space. And that's why they called it the bed sit, because your sitting room and your bedroom are one. And you would have a toilet down the hall that you'd be sharing with a bunch of other people. That was a traditional bed sit. And in 2008, they decided, you know what, that's substandard, or we should remove that and we should make it illegal. So they said that it's going to be, you're going to have 5 years to remove this from your portfolio. We're not going to like impose this on a single day, but we're going to introduce it over a period of, say, 5 years. And what that has done now is remove the lowest rung on the ladder, essentially. So if you're a very, very, like, say if you're down on your luck, maybe you're recovering from a drug problem or a drink problem or something like that, and you're kind of getting back on your feet. You don't have a lot of disposable income, but you're ready to move out on your own. Where are you going to stay? Like, there is nowhere that is kind of cheap, and it's you know, you're looking at expensive stuff. So that is one of the reasons why we have so much homelessness now. So whilst it was introduced for good reasons, it has had a very negative impact. It has caused all this additional homelessness that wouldn't, like, if there was all those beds that's still there, they'd be available for people to live in. But instead they were removed, and therefore now there's a lot more people homeless. So you can see stuff introduced for maybe a good reason turns out to be a very bad decision. They introduced, you know, we have rent pressure zones here in Ireland, and wherever you go, you're not allowed to increase your rent more than 2%. They introduced those in New York City after World War II. And the reason they did it, again, for good reasons, they said that we're going to, the guys were coming back, the soldiers were coming back from fighting the war. And They were arriving back from Europe. Some of them were badly injured and, the shaken after being in a war and stuff like that. They arrive back and they find that prices in New York have shot up and they can't afford to have accommodation. And so there was kind of like, whoa, these are our veterans. These are the guys that like went off and fought in Europe for us. And now we're going to go and we're going to tell them that, sorry, there's no accommodation for you. You'll have to, do what everyone else does. And so what did they decide to do? Let's go and put a cap on rental. You cannot increase rents above a certain level. And this will be good for our veterans. And so that was introduced for a good reason. But what was the impact it had? It caused all of these places where there was these rent caps introduced, it caused the landlords to stop investing, because if you're not able to increase the value of your property, well then what's the point of investing in your property? So a lot of them fell into disrepair and dilapidation and ended up kind of becoming like a ghetto, and you end up in these situations. So what started for a good reason, over time the market corrected it and it suddenly turned it into something that was negative. So that's the only reason I say that it's not an absolute 100% dead certainty that the prices will continue to rise, because you could have, let's say, a new government that comes in and decide to tweak the market, make some little adjustments here and there. Sinn Féin have said that they would put in a 3-year rental freeze. I think that would be really problematic for the market. And you might say, well, you would say that. You're a landlord, wouldn't you? And the reality is that it's nothing to do with that at all. It's to do with, at the moment, you've got people that have bought a property and maybe they rented it to a nice tenant, and the tenant, they didn't increase the rent for the last couple of years. And now the adjoining property might be going on the market for the first time, and the person next door can get, we'll say, 3,000 a month for the property. And your property that you've been renting to this family next door for the last couple of years, you can only get like 1,800 or 2,000. So there's a €1,000 gap between you and the adjoining property. And you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, I need to do some work to kind of get it up to the market level, because I'd like to share in that extra money. And Sinn Féin are saying, no, you can't do that. There's going to be a freeze on all rents for 3 years. And so what's your option? Sure, let's just put the house up for sale, sell the property, and then what's that going to do? So you'll have a home that's on the market and somebody can buy and somebody can move in, but that will be who's buying it to live in it, not buying it to rent it. And so that means that there's another property less in the rental system. And if there's a less in the rental system, then it's going to do what? It's going to push up demand for rental. And so rents will keep going up. And you might not be allowed to increase it, but there will be so few properties on the market that are actually available that it will mean that when there is one property available to go and put on the market, they'll be able to lash it up to whatever price they want. And so the market will continue to put pressure. And if there's less properties in the market, you don't have less people renting in the market, because we have so many people coming into the country. In the last 3 years, our population has increased by 100,000 a year. That's our net increase in population. So we're adding 30,000 houses to a year to the housing stock, but we're adding 100,000 people through immigration. And so where are they going to be accommodated? And if they can't rent, then it's just going to put more pressure on the rental system. You can't expect somebody who's just gotten off an airplane to go and put a deposit down on the house. They're going to want to rent for a while. They're going to want to find their feet, get a job, whatever it might be. But most of the time, people, they're only in the country a couple of weeks. They're not looking to buy in the first couple of weeks. They probably want to get familiar with the area. They want to know, do I like this neighborhood? Do I want to live here, settle down? Or am I going to keep on looking around and rent in a few places before I make my final decision? So people are going to need to rent. And so rent will continue to be under massive pressure, in my opinion. So I hope that answers your question, Ella. And let's see if there's any Ryan, thank you. Yes, I am well. Thank you very much. It's good to see you here. I'm some man to talk. Yeah, thank you very much. I could win a competition for talking, I guess. The 30-year mortgage. Wow, yeah, that's a long mortgage. But if you're at the right age, then you can get that kind of mortgage. They don't give mortgages of that length to people when you get to a certain age. I bought a property on the affordable scheme. Should I try to pay off the equity of 20% sometime? It depends, really. Like, what are you going to do with the equity? Like, the reality is that the affordable scheme, it'll just sit there, and so the property isn't entirely yours. That's the only thing, and the question is whether you care about that. Some people, they like the idea of having no, like, you don't want to have a mortgage, you don't want to have anyone having a some sort of control over your property. So yes, it would be nice to pay it off, but there's no pressure there. Then why would you, in a sense? So I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. Hold on one sec. Okay, question from Matthew. Where do I see housing situation in the next 5 years? I think it's not going to be pretty. I think we're going to continue to see this kind of pressure. I don't see, and there's so many reasons why the housing system is the way it is. You've got construction constraints, you've got labor constraints, you've got funding constraints, you've got planning constraints. It's just like across the board, there are so many reasons that there is a problem. Like, when you go for planning permission at the moment, there's all sorts of delays. You're not clear on what your decision is going to be. It can take you up to a year to go and get planning, or even longer. And it's kind of ridiculous. You go to another country and like 6 weeks later, you have your planning and you can start going. In this country, people can object for no reason whatsoever, which is absolutely insane. But you could actually, anybody listening in here could just decide to go and lodge an observation, somebody's planning permission for no reason. You don't like, you won't necessarily be successful in stopping it, but you can lodge any decision anywhere. You can just say, I think this house is too big. That's my observation. You can lob that in. If the council decide to ignore your observation, you have a right now, because you made an observation, you have a right to appeal that decision. And some people wouldn't be bothered, but others will sort of think, you know what, I can make some money on this. And so it's a shakedown. What they'll do is they'll go and they'll say, oh, we think that this property is going to be detrimental to the environment. And so on that basis, I'm objecting. And there was a whole television sort of documentary on this, and they were saying that they went and they met with this guy and they said, how can we rectify this? We'd like to try to resolve your concerns so that we can remove this environmental damage you're talking about. And the guy came out and said, if you give me 150 grand, the issue will be resolved. And he's like, well, what's that to do with environmental? And it's just like, thanks, Liam. Nice to see you here. When somebody is saying like, you'd like 150 grand, what for? To remove my objection. And you kind of go, okay, so I give you 150 grand, you remove, so your objection has nothing to do with the environmental thing. And it's suddenly you realize it's a shakedown. This person just wants money from you to remove your their objection. That's not illegal. That is actually permitted in law in this state. It should be criminalized because it is essentially bribery of a kind. And so kind of crazy, But anyway, that is one of the roadblocks. Another roadblock is labor. And we have got a massive shortage in labor in this country, and trades and all that. And the construction sector just doesn't have the capacity. We have got, we're building 35 to 40,000 houses a year. We used to be building 85,000. How have we fallen so far? Well, 2008 happened and it crashed the market and caused all this damage. But have a think about, how many people do you know those of you who are young and you've just left school in the last few years, how many of your friends have decided to leave school early and become an apprentice electrician, an apprentice carpenter, an apprentice plumber, any of that stuff? It would seem to me, and I could be wrong now, but from my perspective, looking out, I don't think there are anywhere near the amount of people training to become tradespeople. I just think that it used to be in the past, there was a thing called FOSS, where you got training for all this kind of stuff, and you would go and you'd get support, and somebody would go to work with their uncle or something like that, and they would say, my uncle is an electrician, I'm going to work as an apprentice under him for a couple of years. I'll be on shitty pay, but I've left school and I'm only 15. And so by the time I'm 19, I'll be fully trained and I'll be earning good money. That's essentially the way it used to work. I don't think that that's happening nowadays. I think that people are sort of looking at it and go, I don't think so. I think I'd rather get that job working for Microsoft or Google or whoever, and I'll be sitting in their cool offices that they have, and I won't have to go and work on a building site lugging heavy stuff around the place. That's one of the problems. And so we're not growing our labor force in Ireland any longer, from my perspective. Let me know if I'm wrong. And then if you look at the amount of people that you would try to bring into the country. So let's say you were to say, you know what, we need 50,000 workers to come into this country to work as trades, to work as laborers, and that will really help us to boost our construction system. And if you were to say that, you say, okay, that's great, 50,000 people coming into the country, where are you going to accommodate them? We already have maximum accommodation at the moment. Like, we don't have anywhere to put because of all, like, we're paying tens, as I started this talk tonight, we're paying tens of millions or hundreds of millions a year accommodating refugees and asylum seekers because there is no accommodation. And so we're putting them up in all sorts of places and we're paying a fortune for that. And so where are we going to accommodate legitimate guys that want to come over and actually work here? And, so I think we have some major, major bottlenecks that are preventing us from being able to solve the housing crisis. And I think it's not going away. I think we're going to continue to have it. And whilst the politicians, and it depends if the new party comes in or whatever, if the politicians come in and say, let's fiddle with the market and let's try to change it in some way, and let's introduce a ban on increasing rents, or let's do this or let's do that, it will have an effect on the market. And what it'll do is it'll drive out landlords, or it'll drive up prices, or it'll do something that the politicians never occurred to them. And then what was almost always the case, and you can see it, like the bed-sit ban came in 2013. It was introduced in 2008, but they said you've got 5 years to sort of get ready for this. And in 2013, it came in. That was a mistake. They should never have gotten rid of it, because there's a bunch of people at the lowest end of the market that would have only been delighted to have a bed sit rather than either living at home with their parents or being on the street. And so, but has anyone sort of said, you know what, we were wrong. Let's bring this back. Let's repeal this decision. Co-working or co-living. There's a ban on co-living. Why is that? Can anyone tell me what is wrong with co-living? If you have got a student accommodation block in a university and you have 500 sort of school, or say students, university students, all living in that block, sharing the place, having a good time, doing their college and stuff. And then as soon as they're finished, what are they expected to do? Move in, buy a house and compete with the families that have children and stuff, or go and buy an apartment. A lot of the time what they want is they want to continue a little bit more of that college style lifestyle, where you're single and you want to be around your friends. And if you had the opportunity to move into a big block full of similar young people, would you do it? I know a lot of people that would say yes. Now, Maybe you have a partner, and maybe you're, as a couple, you're thinking, no, I don't think that I need that lifestyle anymore. I think we'll go and do our own thing over here. That's fine. But I would say a lot of people who are out of university and are still quite young would think, you know what, that sounds like a great thing. They banned co-living in the last couple of years. Why did they do that? My guess is your guess is as good as mine. It became a political hot potato, and all of a sudden the opposition parties were targeting the housing minister, and they said, this is substandard, this is terrible, this is like the bed sits. And sure enough, they said, okay, we're banning it. That was a mistake. But will anyone admit that it was a mistake and say, yeah, let's bring it back? No, nobody's going to do that. You just don't admit that you made a mistake when you're in the government or when you're in politics in general. And so there you go. None of that is going to be repealed. And so the mistakes that have been made just continue to compound. And that's the bit that you just don't know. Anyway, I'm not supposed to rent out affordable house anyway around that. Yeah, like I don't think there is a way around that. And in fact, I think there's a risk with what you're talking about, because I have seen inspectors showing up at your door and showing an ID and saying, hi, here to do an inspection, just making sure that you're not renting out the property, that you're, and next minute you're caught. And it happened to my sister. Thankfully, she wasn't doing that. She was actually living in the place, but they arrived at the door and they were like, this is from the council or whatever, and want to know want to see your apartment, need to inspect. So they come in, have a look around, and you're living here on your own as you're supposed to. Yes. Sure, you don't have anyone that's sharing the place with you or anything like that? No. Okay, fine. Off they go. But if they found that you're renting it out and you're not the owner or whatever, then they would come down on you. DXB Dean. Gavin, I'm currently living in Dubai. I will settle in Ireland eventually. I am almost ready to buy a small first-time investment now. Should I do so in Ireland or Dubai, in your opinion? Well, it all depends, like, what you're thinking. What are your long-term strategic sort of plans? If you're thinking about, just making money, then it's hard to say. Like, if you're planning on coming back to Ireland, what you could do is buy a place, rent it out for a couple of years, and then you'd have somewhere to move into. But if you're talking about just making your money work for you, possibly Dubai. I'm not sure if he's on tonight, but Fintan was one of my school friends. He's an agent who's based in Dubai, and he's often on this live stream. And Fintan would give you lots and lots of reasons why Dubai is the place to go invest your money. But you have to research the market. One of the things that I will say, Dean, is I see a lot of people making a decision to buy somewhere, and they're kind of just asking a few people around the place. They don't do a huge amount of homework. Like, if you're making an investment in a property, let's say it's 200, 300, 400 grand, whatever it might be, like, that's a significant investment, and you can make a mistake and it can cost you a lot of money. And it might not, it might not be so much that the property goes down in value, but you can sometimes find that you're kind of locked in, that you're unable to sell that property for various reasons. Maybe you bought badly and it's an area that's not really particularly good. I bought my first property, which was an apartment on Westmoreland Street. On Westmoreland Street, there's advantages to Westmoreland Street. In the centre of Dublin, the parade goes right up the middle of Westmoreland Street, up towards College Green. And I had an apartment looking out over that on the second floor. And I can remember on St. Patrick's Day, I went into town and I went up to my apartment and I opened the window, big sash windows, and I sat on the ledge, and it was great sitting there looking at this beautiful parade going by my window. And I thought, wow, what a cool place to have bought. Like, I was so proud of myself. And then, fast forward a couple of months, and it's the winter time, and you're kind of walking around. You're coming home from, say, you've been out for dinner or something like that, and you go up to the door of your apartment, and it's kind of like set back off the street a little bit of an alcove or whatever. And there's a homeless guy asleep at your door. And so you can't open the door because this person's against your door. So you now have to go and wake this guy up. And like sometimes they're using drugs or whatever, so they're completely out of it. And you have to try to kind of open your door and move this guy forcibly to kind of get your door open to go into your house. Not a great feeling that, first of all, you can't go in without this at your door. But second of all, you know, that person is downstairs now. Do you feel safe going out in the night if you want to go to the shop and pick up, you know, a thing of bread or milk or something like that? There's various little things that suddenly started to occur to me that can't be great. That, you know, it's not great. The first time it happens, you might sort of blow it off as, you know, this is living in the city. But if it's every night of your existence that you're living in this place, it gets tired pretty quick. The other thing, my apartment was above a fast food restaurant. It was above Abracababra, I think it was. And every night they would, you know, heat up the fat fryers, and the smell used to kind of waft up through the apartment. And so even though it was on the ground floor and I was on the second floor, we could smell the cooking in the apartment. And I can remember getting tired of that as well. You'd open the window and you'd be like, you know, let's like try and freshen this up a bit. So there's various reasons why you can make mistakes, and that comes with a bit of experience, obviously, but also just doing your research and understanding what you're buying. And so, Dean, what I would suggest is look into both of these, like look into the Dublin market, do your research, look at what the rents are, look at what the rates that you're paying are, what's the taxation on it, what is the likely time frame for you to sell in the event that you said, you know what, I've made a mistake, I want to get my money out. How quickly could you get back out of that deal? And look at the yield, like what are your borrowing costs versus what are your rental income yield? So you can kind of just work out, am I going to be making a profit here? Because Dubai has gotten very expensive in the last couple of years, I understand. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the rents have gone up. So maybe it is that the prices to purchase have gone up a lot, but the rents have stayed around the same. Maybe I'm wrong. But if that is what's happened, then the yield could be very, very low. And you might be buying a place that has like a 3% yield, but you might be borrowing at a 5% yield. So you're actually losing money every month. So anyway, let's see if there's any more questions. The real question is, do you have an eye for interiors? No point doing up your house if it's basic. No. The young tradies I know emigrated or left because pay was miserable while being trained. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Unless we make it more attractive to the trades, like why would you choose a trade? Like if you're going to be, and as well as that, somebody was saying to me earlier today about this, they were saying that young people that are going into the trades, they're not necessarily going now at the age of 15 like it used to be. A lot of the time they're deciding to go after they do the leaving cert, in which case you're kind of older, you may be 17 or 18. And if you're going into one of these low paid apprenticeships at 17 or 18, that suddenly is noticeable. Whereas at 15, maybe it wasn't so noticeable. So, Gavin, it is hard to get young people who will do manual labor. Yeah, it is. But in a sense, like I'm not surprised if you think about it. If the options are, you know, if it's easier to go and hire somebody in a tech company than it is to get them on a building site, then, you know, why would you choose the building site? And this is one of the things. I think there should be more supports for young people that are going into trades. Like the government should be looking at this, and they should be saying that we have a major issue here. We need to make trades cool again, or sexy again, or if not cool and sexy, then just more profitable. And so what we'll say is, if you're going into the trades, then first of all, the person who's going to train you, let's say it's your uncle or your dad or some stranger or whatever, it has to be an incentivized thing for them, because it can be a lot of hassle training somebody. You're like, instead of getting on with the job, you have to show them how to do the job. And so that can actually maybe slow you down. So you should be incentivized for that. The young guy that's coming to work for you, he should be incentivized in some way. So it's like, yes, you might be getting more money working in Facebook, but look at all these extra things that you're getting. Like, you can't really expect people to choose a job where they're going to be paid less, unless it's really, really attractive at the outset. And then they've made their decision to be in that trade, and they start making money then in a couple of years' time. Do I still have property in Soto? Yes, I do. I have a villa in Soto, and I'm still fond of the place. Soto is a place in Spain called Soto Grande, and I have a place down there. I did a big project down there, and I tried to do a big project down there. It didn't work out. It was a disaster, let's just say. Looking to buy property here and rent it out. Also looking to move to Australia for a few years. Okay. I'm looking into renting the house to the council, so they basically become the landlord. Have I ever handed a property over to the council to rent it out? I haven't personally, but funny, I was actually having this conversation already today with a client. A client of mine has got a property with 7 apartments in it. Now, there's a long story to this. Apparently, the 7 apartments haven't been occupied for 18 years. They were built, but when they were finished, I think it was one of these sites that were half finished, and then the bank pulled the funding, and so it wasn't completed, and there wasn't, the certificate of completion was not handed over. And if a certificate of completion is not handed over, usually it's because there might be fire regulations that haven't been fully complied with or whatever. And so you step into this property and you have to go and fix all of this stuff before you can actually rent it out. So he's actually in the process of doing that, but he's doing that, and he's going to be getting the funding from the local council. And so the local council are going to pay him to do the work. They're not paying him to do the work. They're giving him a loan, but it's an interest-free loan for, I think the maximum period of repayment is 15 years. And in return for that, he can rent the property to the council for 15 years. And so the rent that he's getting from the council will be more than the loan. And so he'll have a profit every month, but he won't have any of the hassle of managing it. It all gets managed by the local council for the local council. And as well as that, it is not, if the property is empty, the council are still paying for it. So it's up to them to put the accommodation to use. It's not up to you to fill it or any of that stuff. So it seems like a very good deal. Now, one of the downsides of renting to the local council is that you have to accept 85% of the market rate. So you cannot get 100% of what is out there. What they will do is they'll go into the market and they'll take some sort of an assessment, and they'll say that the average rent in this market is 1,000 a month, and we're going to give you 850 a month based on that. So you have to be able to accept that. But having somebody who will look after all of this for the next 10 years or something, it's quite an attractive proposition. And in that period of time, if you go away, you know that the money is just lodging into your bank account for that duration. Now, if you're looking at doing that, you do need to think about, there are certain minimum standards that the local council will insist on before they'll rent a place from you. So you might say, I've got a place for you to rent, and they might say, okay, great. They'll send an inspector. The inspector will walk around and say, that needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed, that needs to be replaced. And you end up with this list of things that need to be done. And so it's a good idea to try and get your hands on that list, so you can maybe do this stuff before that inspection takes place. And at least then you might be able to speed it up, So Colin, I hope that answers some of your question at least. Let's see if there's anything else here. We have no questions there. And let's see, is there anyone's here? Okay, from Mandy, it looks like. Hi, Gavin. Do you think there are opportunities to rent large-scale new build homes to local authorities on long-term FRI leases? Yes, I think you can do it, but I think there's a bit of homework. So I can already tell you, one of my clients in my accelerator is an architect who works for the local council doing exactly what you're talking about. So pardon me for a sec. So he works for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 local councils. He's driving around the country all the time looking after them, but he will design up the scheme, and the local council will agree to everything, and then a builder will build it, and it will be pre-sold a lot of the time, or else it will be just rented. And what they'll do is they'll enter into this long-term agreement, where we were actually going to do it ourselves. We're building an apartment building in Raheny, and in the end we decided not to, for the 85% thing, but you can do this. We were looking at it, building 100 apartments and renting them all to the local authority. And so that would be a large scale deal. And what they were offering was 25 years. So it is FRI. It's 25 years FRI. For those of you who are not familiar, FRI means full repair and insure. So your obligations are completely handed over to the local authority. You don't need to repair the property. You don't need to insure the property. You don't need to do anything. It's fully taken over as if the council owns it for the 25 years. And then at the end of the 25 years, maybe they renew, or maybe they hand it back to you. And but one way or another, like over that 25 years, you pay down all of your debt, and you end up, with, there's actually a lot of the time, like being rented, having a scheme rented to the local authority is effectively like having a government bond. And so it's quite valuable in terms of what it's worth. A lot of people would go out there and they would look at that and they would say, wow, I'd love that. Like there would be pension funds that would think that that's a fantastic, if you had an apartment building, say 100 apartments rented to the local council for 25 years, that's like guaranteed income for 25 years. A lot of people would find that very, very attractive. Colin says, thanks for the answer. Hassle-free dealing with the property while it's, yeah, definitely. It's worth the 15%. I think you probably spend that 15% on management. So especially if you're away, like you might spend 10%, like, so a little bit of extra. I think you're probably smart to do that if you can do it. Like that's the thing, is just make sure you've got all the stuff lined up. So Mandy, I hope that answers that question. Yes, that is happening at the moment. I have a client who is actually doing that. By the way, guys, anyone who's interested, if like you're at a more advanced level, asking those kind of questions, Mandy, it sounds like you might be. I have an accelerator where I teach this kind of stuff, and I teach people how to put those kind of deals together where you're renting them out to local authorities and you're getting investors to kind of back you and things like that. That's for the high level stuff. I also have stuff for starters and stuff like that. So if any of you guys are interested in this kind of thing, reach out to me, like send me a DM or whatever, and just ask, and I'll be happy to share. Please check my question above. That's from Malik. So let me have a look, Malik, if I can find your question. Might be easier for you to write the question again rather than ask me to search, because I don't see it. So maybe send it again, Malik, if you can. Gavin, what are your thoughts on Airbnb as a more profitable alternative if willing to put in the work and only a small portfolio, one rental to start, hope to scale quick? Yes, JK 1,000 or 11,000. I've actually got a client who's doing this at the moment. What's interesting is this is an idea for you, or you're thinking about scaling, is that when you're putting a service like this, when you're doing Airbnb, it's all about the systems you employ, because you're going to have to go and introduce various systems in order to promote the property and all that kind of stuff. And then when somebody moves in, you have to have systems there for them to easily get the key. You also need to have systems for the place to be turned over if the person is moving out on a Saturday morning and you've got somebody moving in that afternoon, like you've got to be able to turn over the cleaning and all that kind of stuff pretty quickly. So there's systems. Doing systems for one rental can be problematic insofar as it can be costly. Like having somebody lined up ready to move in and clean your place, that's fine, if it's a relative or something like that. But a business who's offering are not going to be for one property. Whereas if you had 20 properties, they'd be like, oh, that's a great contract. Like we'll do all 20 of your properties and they can employ somebody and that kind of thing works. So that's the first thing. But what one of my clients has done is what's known as rent to rent. And that is, instead of buying a property and turning it into an Airbnb, you go out and you find somebody who is looking to rent their property as a traditional rental. And you say somebody puts their property on the market and says, I just want 1,000 a month and I don't want any hassle. I don't want you to be asking me to replace things. I don't want you to be telling me there's a problem every time the toilet seat is broken or whatever it is. You handle all the hassle and I'll give you a nice cheap rent of 1,000 a month. Fine, no problem. You turn that into an Airbnb, and my client, he's paying 1,000 a month to the landlord, but he's pulling in about 2,500 to 3,000 a month on the Airbnb. So he hasn't spent anything on the property, and yet he's making $2,000 a month Airbnb-ing it. And so that is an interesting way to do it. Now, obviously, there is a bit of risk there if your systems are not up to scratch and you're not able to take the Airbnb, if you're not able to fill it, then you've got a cost of 1,000 to your landlord, and you've got no income coming in because you're still learning the job. That's the bit that you need to be a little bit careful of. But definitely, now you have to look at restrictions on Airbnb. There are certain like rent pressure zones and stuff like that. I've seen that Airbnb requires planning permission. And if you don't have planning permission, you're not allowed to do it. You need to have certain places, you need to have a license. I know my villa in Spain, that somebody was asking about, do I still have my place in Spain? I have the place in Spain and it's rented out to a guy for the last couple of years because it was easy for me just to rent it to somebody, take care of it for a couple of years. But now I'm thinking, actually, I would like to do Airbnb because then I can use it whenever I feel like it. And so it makes sense for me to do that. But to do that, I have to actually go and I have to register the property in the local town hall as a short term. And I'm taking it out of the long-term system, putting it into the short-term system. So there's a paperwork to kind of go through and all that. And so you need to make sure that all of that stuff checks out, because what you don't want is restrictions about how often you can rent it out as an Airbnb. I know there's a property in Dublin that I've been looking after, and I think there was something like 3 months was the max that you could rent it out as an Airbnb. The rest of the time it required you to do it like as a traditional more, they just didn't let you do Airbnb all year round. Yes, is that the apartment block opposite the Raheny train station? Yes, that's me, or that's the family business. Liam, Gavin, I have to pop off now, but may give you a call soon to catch up. Oh, yeah, that's from Liam. Good to see you, Liam. Cost upwards, services costs, as you know, large element bill costs. People underestimate. Yeah, it's true. Like the cost of everything is it's really difficult. I was getting prices in recently for a small fit out, and it's coming, like the estimates are coming in at 430 grand. And I was, am I wearing socks? Bobby wants to know, am I wearing socks? Okay. Thank you, Bobby. ICF bills, not cavity. It would be ticking time bomb, basically. Damp. Ideally, how many properties do you need to own and rent out before it becomes profitable? Well, that's a good question, though, because there's a certain level where there's growing pains when you're getting into property. Like there's the learning curve, and then if you buy a property, we'll say a house share. Like I know somebody that bought an old country house, like one of these big kind of country houses, and I think it had something like 15 rooms. So it was one of these old period sort of manors or something. And he bought it, and he bought it very cheap because it was like big houses are not always that attractive because there's a cost to owning them and stuff. But he managed to buy this place for something like 290 grand. And then he spent a certain amount doing it up he spent another 60 grand on it, I think. So it was so it's costing about 350. But he is bringing in about 90,000 a year in rent from that property. So do the sums on that, like 90,000 on the property they bought for 350. Like within 4 years, you have fully paid off your purchase price. So that's a pretty damn profitable deal. So there are deals out there that one deal can make all the difference. I was very fortunate. One of the first deals that I did was bought a site, got planning on it, and that site, I bought it for 25,000 with planning permission on it. That site went up to 125. So 100,000 profit on a 25,000 investment. Really profitable deal. Did another one, and it was something similar, like basically like tripled my money on a deal. So it is possible to do really, really well. But what people do is they get into property without knowing enough about property, and they get into it in the most basic way that they know, which is buy a place that looks a little bit like the home you live in and rent it out. And they don't do their homework around the cost. They don't do they don't understand the difference between the rents in certain areas. If you go into, a city center, highly popular area, the prices will be very, very high, but the rents don't compensate for that. And you can have a yield as low as 3%. Whereas if you go to a rural location, like some sort of a village or something like that, there might not be as many people living in that area. But if there is a source of employment in that area and there's people looking to live in that area, you can get 25% return. And so, and that might not be much, because if you buy a property for, say, 150 grand, and then you have got, for you to actually earn, we'll say, like it could be a small amount that you want to earn from that property, and to make a profit like 1,000 a month, that's, you're getting close to 10% yield on that. So this is the thing: go in and do your homework, understand what you're buying, understand the rental differential from the purchase price, and that way you can figure out whether or not there's a nice difference between your borrowing cost. One of my clients is a young guy in his 20s, and he's got 4 properties now, and so it can be done. And he's running around managing all these properties. It's profitable for him already, and I know that because he's bought himself a car, and he was telling me all about the car that he was going to buy with the profits from the business. So it is possible, but you got to be sort of smart enough to understand what it is you're doing. And I do know that a lot of people, they underestimate the work that's involved in property, and they overestimate the profit that you can make and stuff like that. Like, I've made some great money on property, but I've also lost a lot of money by getting it wrong. And so if you get it wrong, it can be very painful. One of the worst deals that I ever did was buy a property that I thought I was going to rent out really, really quickly. And I had somebody expressing an interest to move into it straight away. And then they changed their mind. And after I had committed to buying the building, they pulled out. And so I was like, for God's sake, like, you told me you were interested. That's why I bought this place. And they're like, sorry, we changed our mind. So I said, okay, grand, I'll go and rent it to somebody else. 9 years trying to find somebody to rent that property. Couldn't find anyone. 9 years of paying interest on a loan. 9 years of the place getting broken into because it was kind of empty. As just the most pain. I lost a lot of capital. What is he saying? the site. Was the site you bought and got planning on a gamble? You didn't get planning, you could be stuck. Yeah, it was a bit of a gamble, but the thing is you start to know what's possible the more you get into these sites. I didn't have any capital starting out, like 25 grand starting out was not a lot of capital, but I got 125 back within 3 months on that deal. The site, if you buy a site with, say, an acre of land and you can get it for the right price, and you can get planning permission on it, then that's going to make money. Now, the problem is that what people might not realize is they might overpay for the site. So you pay a certain amount and then you struggle to get the planning permission. Or as I see people doing nowadays, the issue nowadays is that the local authority will often force you to put much more density on the site than maybe you want to. And so, for example, we have a site that I bought the site in Carrickmines 10 years ago, say, and I think it was about an acre, and we put 4 houses on this. So they're beautiful, big, like 5-bedroom detached houses on the nice garden, and really beautiful houses, like very, very expensive to go and purchase. That was what we built on an acre site, and we did really, really well. Now, fast forward 10 years, and we bought a site very close by, like almost a stone's throw from the other site, an acre in size. So you would say, okay, let's go and build 4 houses. It worked on that site. Let's do it on this site. This site is now very close to the Lewis. And because it's close to the Lewis, the densities are much higher. And so we are expected to build 30 units on that site, 30 apartments essentially. And you try and build 30 apartments, whereas you can build 4 houses, you can build one at a time, sell one off, start building the next one if your cash flow is problematic. But 30 apartments must be built in one go, and you can't sell it until the whole thing is finished. So you have to borrow maybe like 15 million to do that. And that's a lot of money to borrow, and your costs of holding the property and finishing it and everything like that, like there's massive money involved. So the risks are much bigger. And so 30 units on an acre, you might think that sounds like it's worth more than 4 houses on, but a lot more people are capable of developing 4 houses on an acre than are capable of building 30 units on an acre. So it's little things like that, it's important to kind of remember. But yeah, I could have been stuck. And like I have been stuck with properties that didn't, like I mentioned already, I didn't rent when I thought I was going to rent that property, and then the tenant pulled out. Like, it's so frustrating. We actually had a couple of people interested for a while. We had a guy wanted to go in and open a fast food restaurant. And so we had to go, and it was initially going to be a convenience store. And the convenience store option, those are the guys that pulled out. So we said, okay, instead what we'll do is we will build we actually had a building there. We just had to change the planning for the use of them. And we had to go at the difference between a convenience store and a fast food restaurant is a different change of use planning. So we changed the use to restaurant use, and these guys opened up something, started to sell burgers or whatever they did. And they hadn't paid us rent yet. They got like 6-month rent free, which would be kind of typical. You would offer a new tenant, you'd offer so many months rent free to help them with the cost of setting up the place. So these guys set up their kitchens, opened up their doors to start trading. And no sooner had they done that, the guy called us up and just said, listen, I have a real problem. And I said, what's the problem? You seem to be trading fine. He says, yeah, it's quite nice, but the local gougers, basically, they have come around and they've said that they want us to be paying them, or else they won't protect it was a protection racket. And they said, like, we want you to pay us to keep the bad guys away from the store, and you won't have customers with broken windows and things if you pay us. And he wouldn't pay them because he'd only just opened his doors, so he refused to pay them. And so they used to smash the wing mirrors on cars that were stopped to go in for a burger. And so he had to close down. So by the time the 6 months was up, he hadn't paid us any rent yet. And he said, guys, I'm out of here. And he took off. So we never got anything for that. But except we now had kitchens installed where there wasn't anything before. And so that is one of the painful hangovers of getting a deal wrong. And it happens. Like, I think if you're an active property investor, you have to face facts that you may get it wrong sometimes, because you're looking at a lot of deals, you're making decisions. Like, one of the big problems, I think, is that there is a spectrum from one side to the other. You've got the gambler is on one end of the spectrum and the analyst is on the other end of the spectrum. And some people are gamblers and they'll jump at a deal. If there's an opportunity, they'll just jump straight at it, like going all in when you're playing poker or something like that. That's what they'll do. So those guys don't have any problem making a decision. Then the opposite end of the scale, you've got the person who's really analytical, very scared that they'll make a mistake. And so they'll think about it. And then once they've thought about it, they'll think about it some more and they'll analyze the deal to death. And what happens in those cases is that a lot of the time they're so slow to make a decision that usually somebody else, the gambler, has bought the property before they had an opportunity. And so you end up in a situation where the gambler buys all the properties but gets them wrong. The analyst never buys anything because he spent so long trying to analyze the deals. And so both extremes are bad. You want to try and find some happy medium somewhere in the middle. And if you're in the middle somewhere, then it can be a little bit better. It means that you will make some mistakes, but you're also going to be quite analytical. So you're going to have checked the deal. Sometimes it helps to have a partner who has one personality and you have the other. So the two of you can kind of argue and debate whether or not something is a good deal. And whoever makes the most cogent argument wins. And then you go ahead and do the deal. And then you can beat them up if it goes wrong. It can't all be profit. You haven't mentioned tax that has to be paid to the revenue. Yeah, of course, there's taxes to be paid. But like, you only pay tax if you make money. So from that point of view, I don't have a problem paying tax. Like, I made a lot of money on one particular deal and paid 30%. No, actually, when I did that deal, the tax rate on capital gains was only 20%. So 20% capital gain, and that was it. It's worth paying that for a decent payday. Now, what you can also do, if you are smart in the way you structure your ownership, is if you have a business or a trading company, you can create a pension fund, and it's known as a self-administered retirement trust. You can create that, and you can put money into that. Every penny of money that you take from your company and put into your pension is tax-free for you and for the company, because the company's profits have been reduced by the amount that it put into the pension. And so let's say, for example, you had a company that made 200 grand last year, and you have 200 grand, you'll have to pay tax on 12.5% of that. So that's 25 grand tax. And you think, okay, I can either write a check for 25 grand to the revenue, or I can go and I can put 150 grand into my pension. And if you put 150 grand into your pension, then your profits have been reduced. They're not 200 now, they're only 50. So your 12.5 on 50 grand is only what, 6,000 euro. And so you pay 6,000 instead of 25,000. And you have a pension now that has 150 grand in it. So what do you do with that pension? You buy a property with the pension. You can also borrow money through a pension, so about 50-50. So you put 150 in, you borrow 150, you buy a property worth 300. Let's say you borrow at a 10 and it's got a 10% yield, then 30 grand a year coming in, completely tax-free inside the pension. No tax on any rent. And if the property goes up in value and you sell it, you don't have to pay any tax when you sell it either. So the pension is an amazing tax-free vehicle to go and do that kind of thing. And the other good thing about a pension is that it basically puts manners on you in a roundabout way. Like, if you're a person who, if there's money sitting in your bank account, it's kind of like burning a hole in your pocket, and you're like, oh, I'd love to go and buy something. Let's go on a nice holiday or whatever. If it's sitting in your pension, you can't touch it. And so it removes that temptation. And so it is kind of like a guaranteed way of growing your sort of retirement savings, we'll say, which might seem very boring to young people. But instead of thinking to yourself, oh, this is really boring, like, having a pension. But the reality is that a lot of people think it's cool to go and buy and sell, money on the stock market. But yeah, it's great. Treat it like a game. It's like every time you make money in the stock market, it goes into your pension, and now your pension has become bigger and you're wealthier. And you're just not able to take it out for yourself. You just keep on growing it. And so there's no better way for you to kind of really reinforce your investments than to just play with it like that. Kevin asked a question. I should be watching the YouTube comments as well. Was wondering what your thoughts are on Amazon's 100% return to the office. I think this is really interesting because it's kind of the first big tech company that is kind of talking about going back to work. This is a major issue that many of you might not be aware of, but since COVID came in, there's been this work from home kind of being allowed, and then it's turned into hybrid, and it's turned into kind of real flexibility, which, let's face it, people like the flexibility of being able to sort of work from home and stuff like that. But from a business perspective, it's not great for a couple of reasons. First of all, the company culture can be impacted by it. I was at a party on Friday, and it was a retirement party. One of the guys that I know who started in a company where I work, he started the company, I think 13 years ago, and he built it up, and he was retiring. And they had a party for him on last Friday, and I was invited. I'm not in the company, but I was invited as a kind of friend. And I was sitting there watching them all telling jokes and like putting up photographs of all the fun they were having. And this is a company with a great culture. They all have great banter, have a laugh, everything like that. It was nice to see it. And then you go to other places where there are you just don't have that culture. Like, a lot of people are just working from home. Nobody knows each other anymore. You go in occasionally, like with your teeth gritted because you don't want to be in work. You want to stay at home. That is not great for culture. And that is not great for making you feel like you're part of a team or a family or a community. And so you kind of feel like, if I go and move to another job, like I won't miss any of my work colleagues. Whereas if you've got that culture and that banter and the fun, then you kind of think like, I'm not leaving here. I love this place too much. Like, I'm not going. So that's one of the negative downsides. The other side to it, though, is that a lot of office buildings are becoming empty, and it's really problematic, not just for the owners of those office buildings, which I'm sure nobody gives a shit about some office landlord, like, don't get me wrong. But what it is also impacting is the businesses that used to occupy the retail units around those offices. So if you go on to Leeson Street or one of those kind of streets, there's little cafes and, sandwich bars and all that. And they used to do a great trade Monday to Friday, selling to the office workers for breakfast and lunch and everything. And then fast forward to today, and if people are not coming in on a Monday, not coming in on a Friday, Wednesday's maybe the busiest day. Some people come in on a Tuesday, some people come in on a Thursday. Like, those sandwich places are not doing as well as they were because of that. And so they're all feeling like a much bigger reduction on the amount that they're able to take in and stuff. So to answer Kevin's question, like, Amazon saying that you're back 5 days a week, I think it's probably a good thing. There might be some pushback and resistance from the people who work there, but I think it'll be good for the overall economy, I think, because working from home, I think, makes you a little bit less efficient. I know how easy I'm at home at the moment. Like, when I'm at home, there tends to be a lot more distraction than if you were in the office. If you're in the office, there's not a lot to distract you from your work. When you're at home, every time you go down to make a cup of tea or coffee or something like, better go and put the washing on, better let the dog out. Like there's just constant distractions. And so from an overall productivity level, I don't think it's good either. So there you go, Kevin. That's my take. I think there is some pushback from some of the other tech companies. I'm not sure who was it. Was it Microsoft or Meta? One of them said that they weren't going to be doing the 5 days a week. So I think it's all driven by whoever's in charge. So if the boss likes working from home, well, then that's where he's going to be thinking. And he's going to be thinking, well, if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for everyone else. Okay, some more questions. I've got some more questions here. Let's have a look. Am I happy with this government? I think they're probably better than the alternative, but I wouldn't say I'm entirely happy with them. I don't think that they're doing enough for the sector. I mean, the property sector. And when I say that, I can expect lots of hate and lots of, people saying, yeah, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But honestly, the amount of people that are pulling out of the property sector at the moment is just ridiculous. Like there used to be thousands of people who were landlords and they owned one or two properties, and all it was that they wanted something maybe that they could leave their kids, or they wanted something that could pay them a rent as their kind of pension when they're older. That was why they bought it. They weren't buying it because they were some sort of megalomaniac that wanted to kind of dominate the world. That's what they're, and they have been pushed out of the market by all of this regulation, by saying that you can't increase your rents by so much. And so you're kind of discouraged from being in the market. Then they introduced the RTB where you have to register every year. And now anytime there's a dispute, it can take like 18 months to get a decision. So you're there waiting to get rent. The rent's stopped because the tenant's saying we have a dispute. You still have a mortgage to pay. So a lot of people are just saying, you know what, I don't need this grief in my life. I'm just going to sell the property. So loads of people getting out of the market. And that means that there isn't very many properties. The only properties that are going to be on the market are going to be big blocks that are rented by big funds, and they'll be rented, at 100 at a time kind of a thing. And that'll be a very professional outfit. They'll probably have concierge and all that kind of stuff, but it'll be costly to do. Whereas the old days where you could rent from somebody and you could do a house share and all that, I think those days are going to be more and more limited. And I think the way it's going, I would say at some point in the next couple of years, there will be no houses that are available to rent anywhere. There will just be houses that are owned by people, and there will be big blocks of apartments and big blocks of student accommodation and things like that. And that'll be it. That'll be the what do they call it? The market is going to basically split into those, bifurcate, I think it's the word I was looking for. The market will split into people who own houses and the big funds that own apartments that are for rent, and everything else will just fall by the wayside. And so students that are looking to rent, do kind of a house share where they rent a place and 5 of them share the rent, that won't be possible because the landlords will just get rid of that, and it won't be worth the hassle. And so I think the government are not doing enough. I think the fact that they banned co-living was a stupid idea, and they don't have the courage to kind of come out and say, you know what, we're bringing that back. I think that was a mistake. They didn't do anything about the planning system. They could have gone and overhauled the planning system. They could have outlawed those payments that people can demand, like the shakedown that I was talking about earlier. They didn't do anything about that. So I think I wouldn't be voting for the other party because I think I'd be more worried about what gets introduced there. But I think there's a lot more work to be done. So I hope that answers your question. What's better, buying investment property in person name or company name? Right. So I've talked about this quite a few times. There's a few different things. Like if you buy it in your personal name, you got to be thinking, are you just buying a property to have one property and is the idea for you to have extra income, and that's the only reason you're doing it? Or are you thinking about this from the point of view, no, I want to build a portfolio, I want to scale this thing up, and I want to buy multiple properties over the next couple of years, and I'm looking for the most efficient way to be able to do that? Well, in that case, probably the company is the way to go, because you can offset certain other costs and stuff, but the tax difference is not massive. Like if you buy a property in your personal name and you're renting it out, it's about 52% tax that you pay on any surplus. And so it's pricey. If you do it through a company, people think that companies only have a 12.5% tax rate. You don't. When it involves rental income, it's 25%, which is cheaper than 52, obviously. But the way it works is that if you don't distribute that income within 18 months, i.e., if you don't pay it to yourself in a salary format or something like that, then anything that's retained in the company is there's an additional surcharge, and I think it's 17% or 17.5%. So you end up paying 37.5% tax on it. So it's still cheaper than 52, but it is not like it's not cost free to have a company. Like when you start a company, there's administrative costs. You got to file annual accounts. There's compliance that can cost a little bit. So you need to think about that. CPO Donahue is saying there is a lot of people, a lot of Irish people on streets, and we're putting millions of taxpayers' money into keeping, let's say, non-local people. Yeah, well, I started this evening's talk about the amount of money, and I do think you're right in that regard. Like if you look at, and I actually had the paper open earlier, it was the Irish Times, and there was an article that I found, and it was over the weekend, I think this came out, and they were just talking about the amount of money that is going out on, let's see if I can find it. It was the amount of money spent on international protection accommodations. So this is the asylum seekers and the guys that arrive at Dublin airport, and they basically, well, there's all sorts of newspaper articles saying that they actually, like, they rip up their passport when they're getting off the plane, so that they arrive to the passport office and they can basically say, I don't have a passport. And the guys are like, but how did you get on the plane without a passport? And they're like, oh, I've lost it. And what it is that there is criminal gangs involved in they say making fake EU passports. So the person can get on the plane, travel to Ireland, and then they are instructed to dump the passport so that it doesn't get found by the local by the police or whatever. Because if it was found by the police, then the police will be able to investigate, and they might be able to find out where the passport was made or whatever. And so they're telling them to dump it. But actually, if they were to walk up to the office with this passport, like, they would still get the international protection. So it kind of makes no sense that they're dumping the passport, but they've been warned that they have to dump the passport. So anyway, what's happened last week alone, like in the past 1 week, there have been 445 asylum seekers at Dublin airport. 445 just in 1 week alone. So have a think about that in terms of there's 7 days in a week and 445 people in those 7 days. So it's like, what, 30 a day or something like that. It's a lot of people. No, it's more like 50 a day, 60 a day. And those people, they arrive there, they don't have accommodation, they have nowhere to stay, and what the state has to do at that point is put them into accommodation. And it's the companies that are providing that accommodation are making a huge amount of money. Now, some of them, I've been speaking to some of these guys, some of them are, their heart's in the right place. They're actually trying to help these guys. Like, let's be fair, some of these guys are escaping persecution, war, like they've had loved ones killed in war and stuff like that. So some of these guys have gone through a horrendous situation and they arrive here. And so there's people there saying, let's help them. But then there's also people there that are saying, let's try to cash in on this. And they provide like slum-like conditions and they still expect to get paid millions. So the Irish Times came out on Sunday with this, or Saturday maybe, and it was, so it said that the company that is providing accommodation for Ukrainian and international protection applicants at the City West Hotel in Dublin was paid more than 20 million for the 3 months, the last 3 months. So just to give you an idea of how much money is being made by some of these companies. It says here that they go on, they talk about lots of different companies and stuff that did this. Mosney Holidays PLC, which has this resort in County Meath. It was paid 14 million for 3 months of the year, the last 3 months of the year. Guestford Limited, owner of the Red Cow Mourne Hotel in Dublin, was paid 8.5 million to provide accommodation for IP applicants. So you can see, like, that's just 3 companies, and between them, they've been paid like 50 million in just the last 3 months. So what we're talking about there is literally hundreds of millions a year being spent on this accommodation. And I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that how much are we spending on the housing, fixing the housing crisis? Because we're spending hundreds of millions on accommodating guys that are just off the plane, but are we spending hundreds of millions on fixing the housing crisis? Like, we have got a planning system that is just not really working very well. Like, if you take a look at the planning system, it's very, very dated. Like, I'm an architect. I trained as an architect back in 1990, from 1991 to 1997, and I qualified. When I left college, the system that was there when I left college is pretty much still the system that's there now. You go in with a big block of drawings, you put an application sheet on top, you go in, you pay an amount of money at one desk, you go over to the other desk, you hand in the thing, and you're told that it's been received, and then you can go and track it. Now you can track it online. You used to have to do it on the phone. But like, that system hasn't changed. We have got computers now. We can log into our bank online. We can look on our phone. Why are we going in and lodging paper applications for all of these things, whereas we could just push a button and do it from an office or something like that? It just doesn't make any sense. And it is, a lot of the time, it's just labor relations, and it's these kind of rules that the unions insist upon, and they say, we're not introducing anything new. Nobody's going to do anything new, because if we're going to do something new, then we have to be paid more. And that typically, I think, is what happens. And it's the same with the law society. We have a law society that is very protectionist when it comes to the systems that are used for solicitors. So if you're trying to buy a property, you're going to see the solicitor, like if you're buying an old house. I bought a house that was built in the 1840s. And when I bought that house, the legal contract was like this thick, like, we'll say, what's that, like 6 inches thick. And why is that? It's because it has passed through maybe 50 different pairs of hands in its lifetime. And so every one of them was a contract. And then that contract gets added to the document that was before it. And so it just keeps on growing. You can't get rid of the first document, because then you don't have proof of ownership. So it has to go all the way. So like, that system should all be digitized. It should all be some sort of a blockchain thing now, where you can push a button and you can transfer instantly. Completely, it's happening in other countries. Why can't it happen here? Usually it's because somebody somewhere says, no way, we're not doing that. And that means that our members, or our, whoever pays our dues, will have to learn some new technology, and therefore we're not going to do it. And so it's just, the system is, that is one of the biggest problems that we have with the system here, So definitely something needs to be fixed. Jason Taylor, why do you think data centers are not putting solar farms on top of their buildings? So the thing is data centers, I think this is a really important question. I've been looking at this in a lot of detail, and I made a podcast on it not so long ago. A data center consumes a huge amount of power. And most of the people that are thinking about data centers are saying, let's like have a whole field full of solar panels next to it and stuff, so that we can say that it's got plenty of solar and all that. But in the event that the solar goes down, or if it's very, I don't know if it's a dark day or whatever it is, but if there's less efficiency from those solar cells, then you have to rely on the grid. And the problem is that we haven't invested in any power plants in the last, I don't know how many generations now at this stage. And because we haven't made those investments, we're running out of power generation capacity in this country. And whilst that's happening, we have got a need for data centers like you cannot imagine. We have all of these big tech companies coming into the country. They need data centers now. Why? Because all of them are after artificial intelligence. And the thing that artificial intelligence is driven by is data centers for the memory and all that, but also power consumption. And that's why if you have a look at Sam Altman, the guy that runs OpenAI, he's making investments into power stations, into all sorts of stuff. They're actually making investment into nuclear fusion, because they basically are trying to figure out how can they create unlimited power, because that's the constraint on artificial intelligence. And this is, as I said in my podcast a couple of weeks back, think about when they discovered oil in Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Qatar and all these places in the Middle East. Like, these were people that were Bedouin, basically, Arabs that were Bedouin tribes living in tents, traveling around like on camels and stuff like that. And they discovered oil, and suddenly the ruling party, or the ruling family, we'll say the king, they became billionaires or trillionaires overnight. And suddenly you've got like a whole oil economy, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, all these places, enormously wealthy. That oil is no longer the driving force around the world economics. I think data is going to be the next driving force. And I think Ireland is actually really well situated to be a really main hub for all of this. And Ireland could be like in the right place at the right time to actually take advantage of this and be like a really important hub for all of this AI going on around the world. And Ireland could suddenly be like the next Saudi Arabia, that suddenly everyone wants to invest in here because we've got the English speaking, tax friendly American, sort of close to America, on the edge of Europe. It kind of ticks a lot of the boxes, which is why the tech companies are here in the first place. And then all of a sudden you say, but what about your power supply? Oh yeah, we don't have any power, so sorry about that. And what they're actually doing now is they're banning the creation of any more data centers at the moment in the Dublin area. Why? Because they consume so much power, they're actually going to potentially lead to blackouts for the residents in the area. And if that happens, that would be very bad for votes and very bad for locals and stuff. And so now all of a sudden you've got Amazon being told you can't have any more data center. We're just not going to let you do it. And so what do? They said, they made an announcement just last week that they're going to spend all 35 billion in another country. They're not spending it in Ireland. And they have 35 billion to spend, and they decided that they can't spend it in Ireland. So that's 35 billion that was coming to us, except that we kind of screwed up. And so I think that is a major problem for us. And I think this is like a golden opportunity, and we're screwing it up. We should be begging like we should be building power stations. We should be looking for the maximum amount of power generation so that we are able to facilitate all that stuff. And because the more of those big companies come here, the wealthier we become as a nation, the wealthier we become, the more resources we'll have. We can go and try and fix the housing crisis if we have that. But anyway, what can I say? You should vote for me instead. Okay, what areas in Dublin do you think represent good value for rental? You know, it's funny that you're asking that, JK, because I've spoken to a couple of different people, and the areas that you might want to invest aren't always the ones that make good value. The ones that are good value are the ones that maybe you don't want to invest in, if you know what I mean. So I have a friend and a client who buys in the areas that are real working class, and you've got a lot of people that are on assistance, housing assistance, like the HAP payment and stuff. And if you speak to a lot of landlords, would they like to have a HAP tenant living in their property? A lot of them will say no, because they kind of have this negative connotation, like that means that maybe there's going to be social problems, maybe the area is like a lot of unemployment or whatever. This person doesn't have a job, maybe, and maybe that's just a bad like tenant to have. But the people that are actually okay with that, they actually are usually earning about 12% off of the property. And so 12% is a pretty decent yield in Dublin. If you go to a fancy area like Blackrock or something like that, you're probably looking at maybe 3%, 4%. And so it's like 3 times better value. But you've got to ask yourself, would you be good for going up to somebody and saying, I need that payment, and you're talking to somebody who maybe is on HAP and stuff like that, and a lot of people would maybe get a bit sort of jittery at the idea of doing that, and they might think to themselves, being a landlord in an area where there's a lot of unemployment, that may not make you the most popular person, and so you might kind of feel like not a great investment location for me. But for somebody who grew up in that area, who knows a lot of the guys, and they know that he's not some sort of guy that sort of has just blown in with a load of cash, that works for them. So I think that's one of the things that is lowest cost best in terms of purchase, or how would you analyze a deal? It's a combination of a couple of things. Lowest cost, not necessarily, because you can go really too low and you can be in a really rough area that's like getting battered and has a lot of problems with it. But I would sort of keep it in a working class kind of area if you want to have like a good rental yield. And it doesn't mean that you have to kind of pick a bad area. It's just make sure that you're not paying like above the average. The average is, I think, 400 grand is now, like, if you're paying that kind of money, then you're probably going to struggle. So exactly, Gavin. So why could we as a country look after our own? Yeah. Anyway, to be fair, the Mosney guy, he's been operating for over 20 years. Yeah, no, I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying that some of these, like the fact that they can make 8 million in 3 months is staggering to me. Yes, Nesson is saying crazy that planning doesn't have a data room system. It's so out of date. Put the data centers around ships and let them use wave technology, not 10,000 person cities. Yeah. Like the thing is I think we need to be thinking out of the box. I think one of the big problems that we have is that we have too many people that are traditional thinkers, and we don't have, like, if you look at these guys that are developing like technology and that are making startups and all that kind of stuff, like really smart guys, smart kids. Some of these are really young guys, but super innovative, super smart, really kind of making stuff happen. That's the kind of thinking that we need to bring here, instead of all these kind of like old fogies that are like, no, it's got to be done this old way and stuff like that. That just drives me mad, If you take my idea, give me a locker, books, just a few bars of gold. I don't know what. Okay, okay, and then we have the final comment on this one. Why is Ireland sold off its gas rights to the Irish Sea and we don't profit like Norway? Well, it's a good question, but I don't think there's that much gas rights actually out there. I remember over the decades I've been investing. I remember investing in Kenmare Resources was one of the companies that was drilling off the coast, and there was always this excitement that they were going to strike oil, and they never did. So hard to say. But there's one of the things that I've seen, and this goes back to the whole idea of the data centers, power generation. There's going to be, like, in order to generate more power, you could actually do this wave technology, or you could build more of those windmills that are offshore. They're huge things, like they're 30 stories high, some of these things. And that they generate a lot of power. But what I'm seeing is a lot of people are actually, a lot of the departments, the protection kind of areas, they're actually saying, no, this whole area now is protected and can never be built on. And so they're starting to kind of preemptively put these kind of bans on certain areas of the sea so that they don't go and fill them in with this kind of wind power. And I think that might be a problem. I'm heading down towards the end. Like, I'm getting near the end, guys. I've been on 1 hour, 55 minutes. So how do I become a client of yours and what do you offer? Can I suggest that you write to me a direct message? But I've got an accelerator that is for the more advanced guys. And we actually have an October intake. I have an event on Saturday that's for the people in the accelerator. I have a mastermind, which is more of a kind of a weekly community. And then I'm about to launch a starter course for people that are starting out. And it'll mean that it won't be expensive. You buy it and you'll have you'll have me basically taking you through, we'll say 28 modules on property investing, what to look for, what not to make mistakes, and all that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on nuclear power? That's a really good one. Like, I actually think the technology is there that maybe, like, obviously it has a bad name. We had Sellafield over in Wales for years and like polluting the Irish Sea and stuff. So it has a bad name. But I think in France, if you go to France, there's something like 27 nuclear power stations in France, or maybe it's even more, but I know that they're almost exclusively powered by nuclear. So it works. And so it's a great way to do it. It's just obviously the waste byproduct is the problem. National online planning portal. Yes, that's what we have. Or even just the local for each local authority, but it could be based off of the same framework. All right, guys, that let me see. Brian is asking, I heard one of the biggest builders in Ireland that in 3 to 4 years, Dublin will have water. Will have water or won't have water? I do know that Ireland, that water is a problem at the moment. There hasn't been enough investment in Irish water, I think. And like, obviously, if you go back about, I don't know, what is it now, 10 years, but there was all these protests around, should Irish water be charging you at home for using water? And everyone was out like saying, no way, no way. And so, but we have a water system that is Victorian. Like, it was put in when Queen Victoria was alive. So how old is that? And it hasn't been improved upon in that time. And so how do you repair things like that? And so this is the thing. Brian's saying, for the necessary pipeline to fill the demand, it takes 3 years to manufacture and get here. Yeah, like, this is the problem with power and with utilities and infrastructure and all that. Like, that is what Simon Harris was saying, Taoiseach Simon Harris was saying just a couple of weeks ago. He's talking about creating basically a department of infrastructure. So it's like a complete standalone area that basically looks after that, and it's independent. And I think the idea of it being independent probably makes sense, so that it's not held up by politicians and things like that, but it actually has an element of independence. Blood boiling stuff from Adam. Yeah, I'm not sure which specific comment you're referring to. But anyway, look, guys, I hope you found this one useful. As I say, if you do want to work with me or anything like that, just put it into the, send me a direct message and just say, Gavin, I'd like to talk to you about what you do from a coaching point of view. And I'll be happy to just give you the different options and stuff like that. So guys, nice to see you. Hope you spend your Wednesday, the rest of your Wednesday well, and talk to you again soon. Take care.